Good morning and welcome to the third EU Datathon webinar. EU Datathon, it's the open data competition of the Publications Office, and our idea is that you use any dataset from Data Europa and combine it with another dataset and create an app or a service. What is this webinar about? So here we will present you a dataset which is multifunctional and you can use it in many different ways, and it would be very suitable for all of the challenges in EU Datathon. And don't be scared, the deadline is in 7 days, but you only have to propose a one-page document where you describe what you plan to do. And with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to Eugenio.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, so I will be presenting here a dataset which was created in the context of another project which is called SEM-COVID. And the dataset, we call it Euro COVID-19 because it wants to collect or put together different texts describing measures that were taken by member states and by the European Union with regards to COVID-19 crisis. So this presentation will be structure it in 4 parts. First, I will provide a bit of a context. Then I would describe some methodological considerations about how the dataset was put together, or what was relevant or important, then how it was put together, and finally how the EU Datathon participants can use it, can access it, and where to read the documentation. So the context for the Euro COVID dataset is as follows. It's the SEM-COVID project organized by Publications Office, which lasts or is implemented between the December last year and will be finished in February next year. It's totally open source. The data are publicly disseminated. They can be found either on data.europa.eu or on GitHub. There are 2 repositories, one for the infrastructure and one for the actual code doing the actual tasks. And what those tasks are, you will ask. Well, that will be, it's visible here. Basically, the goal of this project, of the SEM-COVID project, is to establish this semantic mapping between the EU and member state responses to the COVID-19 crisis. And more specifically, there are several questions that are important to answer. So first of all, how do these measures compare between, how do the measures compare to each other between the member states and EU in terms of issues or categories they address, or what kind of concerns they address, and the degree of their similarity. In addition, it's also valuable to discover or to see what are the emerging topics in this. I wrote their data sets actually in the measures, so that we can see how they evolve over time. And finally, to the one of our stakeholders, which is Eurofound agency, it's important to know who has done what on which issues are for whom, who are the beneficiaries of those actions. So these are, let's say, business goals, and then we need to set up a data set. We call it Euro COVID-19 dataset, which should enable us to address these project goals. And then it should be a dataset which comprises of texts of COVID-19 measures and should have as much metadata as possible. We will see in a few slides what are those metadata. And also the text should be clean, ready for the NLP tasks. And the metadata, of course, should be ready for data science tasks. Good. So after doing a business analysis, we came up with this 11. We call them business features, or like what kind of fields should be available in the data set. So each COVID-19 measure should be described in terms, or should ideally have descriptions of what is the adopting entity of this measure, what is the category in which it falls, when it was issued, and what is the temporal coverage for this issue, where does it apply in EU as a whole, or only in some member states or in some other geographic locations, where the money come from and what are their amounts, what are the amounts allocated, and then who is the beneficiary, what are the recipients targeted by the COVID measure. And then, of course, BF10, the textual description, the actual human readable, understandable description of the text, whereas BF9 and BF11, they are more technical features, though very relevant in order to establish similarity between the measures and to see what are the emerging topics over time. So even though they are technical, they are relevant from the business point of view. Okay, so that was the context. Then I will switch to some methodological considerations when we started actually putting this data set together. There are 4 main points that I will address here. Basically, we had to pay attention to time and location when we were collecting these texts. And of course, time is the 2020, pretty much the whole year. 2021 most likely will be the whole year, and hopefully not 2022 or 2023, hopefully not, but I hope it's going to cover just 2 years. It applies to text originating from EU geographic area and about the EU geographic area. The language, in this version, we decided to limit to English only. But we plan to extend it to the 24 EU languages. So for now, it's just English. Now, in terms of text register or genre, text genre, right? We decided to go for authoritative sources mainly. So what is officially published by the governments or by the Commission or in the official journals, and as opposed to texts from social media or news outlets or any other sources, so just authoritative sources. And there we realized that we have 2 types of texts. So we have this journalistic type of journalistic genre, and we have legal texts, which is a different genre. It has a different structure. Then in terms of the domain, or the semantic domain of the text, we primarily focus COVID-19 responses. But because we can't always easily make a distinction between responses and reactions, we also cover reactions. And then you would ask me, what's the difference between responses and reactions? What are those? What are those distinctions? So here I present how we conceptualize the domain or the semantic domain of the dataset. Basically, what's in a measure, what's in a COVID measure. So we take to do this, we take a very simplified description of a crisis management, how crisis management, we take this crisis management frame of reference, and we distinguish 4 types of actions. So 2 types of actions are about happen before the event, the crisis event strikes. So these are risks assessment, crisis prevention actions, and we are not interested in those. And then after the crisis event happens, then we talk about reactions and responses to this event. The reactions, as opposed to responses, they are short-term. In the case of COVID, they mainly target public health, so they're public health related, and they have as primary goal to minimize the impact of the pandemics. So these are the reactions. That's how they are conceptualized. The responses, on the other hand, they are medium to long term, so they are not immediate, let's say, actions, but they have a bit broader horizon. And they target all sorts of economic and social issues or related. So it's very difficult to kind of pinpoint it, to say what exactly is the topic, because it's everything else that is affected by either the consequences of the reactions or the consequences of the pandemics itself. So if reactions are easy to kind of pinpoint in terms of its topics, the responses are much broader. Okay, so that's the domain of our dataset. Now, how the data was collected and where from. Again, after doing an investigation, we have seen multiple sources, or we considered multiple sources where we could take the data from. But finally, we decided to use 4 sources, and these are the COVID-19 Policy Watch database, which was put together by the Eurofound agency. The second source is EU Cellar repository, which is the official semantic repository where the official journal of the EU is, or from where the official journal of the EU is published. So it's an authoritative source, and it contains mainly legal and administrative texts. Then the third source is the European Commission Press Corner, and there European Commission offers a curated list of press releases on the measures taken by EU to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. And finally, we wanted to take one or two member states, and then see what did they publish, what the member state published in terms of reactions and measures to the COVID pandemics. Unfortunately, Ireland, or well, let's not put fortune here. Ireland is the only EU English-speaking member states left. So we focused mainly on Ireland. Otherwise, we could have taken also UK into consideration. Later on, when we expand to other languages, to all EU languages, we will then go through each member state press corner and crawl the documents from there. Okay, so these are the data sources. Now, we gave them also code, internal code. So you see it marked with DS_PVDB in the for Eurofound, DS_EU_Cellar, DS EU timeline, and Ireland timeline. So these are the identifiers for each of these data source. How do they characterize in terms of meta properties that we mentioned earlier? So we see that mostly we are dealing with journalistic texts from the EU timeline, from the Ireland timeline, and from the PVDB dataset, we have mostly journalistic genre and legal texts. For now, we obtain only from the seller, and these are mainly the legal texts published in the official journal, and binding and non-binding communications of the Commission. Further on, we should and we will expand to cover also national legal texts, but not for the moment. In terms of business features, which I described earlier, how each of these sources or what features do they cover? As you see in this slide, PVDB covers all the features, not all, but most of them are relevant to the, let's say, or with respect to, let's say, we can answer already many business-related questions with PVDB dataset, but it's not enough because we also want to see how the EU and national, let's say, sources do, and these features are not available. So one of the SEMCOVID project tasks is also to discover these features or enrich these sources. But for the moment, this is what's available in terms of business features. Next, you will ask, how can I use it? Where do I download it? Where do I access it? And is there any code around it that could be of help? And the answer is yes to both questions. You can read the detailed documentation in a report which describes how the Euro COVID-19 dataset was created. And there you will find also a detailed description of the fields of each of these fields available from each of these sources that I mentioned earlier. The data can be accessed on data.europa.eu website or on SEMCOVID GitHub repository, where is also available a source code that was used to generate this dataset. Your contributions are of course welcome. So you can fork or create pull requests. We would be happy to accept them. And if you find bugs or if you have questions about the datasets or the code, you can open issues on GitHub. Okay, and then what can you do with this data? Well, the sky is the limit. So if you focus mainly on the metadata, you can use it for all sorts of exploratory data analysis exercises. You can do data visualizations. You can, pretty much. There's quite a bit that can be done in terms of data science exercises. And then if you focus on the text specifically, it has been cleaned up already. It doesn't have any HTML tags, or the PDFs has been transformed into pure textual representation, UTF-8 encoded. So you can jump in and use it directly for text classification, text mining, topic structure modeling, all sorts of NLP tasks. Then that would be it on my side, giving you a very brief overview of this dataset. As I mentioned, the details are available in a report in this published in the SEMCOVID GitHub repository. And if you want to rerun the exercises, you can do so by using this SEMCOVID infra, which spans the infrastructure and triggers creation of this dataset. You can contact me at that email address. For other questions, the colleagues from the publications office are eager to help. Thank you.
So thank you so much for this presentation. I think this is really a unique data set, and really the sky's the limit in terms of possibilities. I would open it then for questions. Maria, do you have already a question? If not, I kick it off.
Yes, I was wondering, thank you, Eugenio, it was very, very interesting. I was wondering, you mentioned that the project runs until February next year. So
Right.
all those mentions you had when you referred to we plan to extend to more EU languages, or is this what's happening in the next steps, or what's to expect, let's say?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Indeed, when I presented the SEMCOVID project, I provided only very limited view relevant to the dataset, and I did not describe the whole project. And
I'm sorry,
yes.
I just wanted to make sure that, because we address this webinar to the datathoners. So the datathoners that are going to use this data set, what do they expect? The features you explained earlier and nothing more, right?
At the moment, we have available only the features that were described, because we just finished the part of the data collection part, and these are the features that we could get from the sources. Next, we plan to enrich it a little bit, so we will try to add additional features, but I can't actually foresee when those additional features will be available. In fact, the datathoners could undertake those tasks of enriching these datasets with those business features themselves, and that would be of tremendous help for the project. And the languages, if I mention the languages and additional sources, perhaps we can do that in the beginning of the next year, but not sooner, because now we need to focus on other business questions that were addressed in the beginning of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Eugenio.
Let's say I'm a participant and I come from member state A, and I would like to work with my member state with their response. How can I link it then to your data set?
That's a good question. We can take a look at the parts. So where is it? Here. So the PVDB source, or let's say sub dataset, contains descriptions of COVID-19 measures of all member states. And it's growing. It covers at the moment over 1,000 entries, and it's growing. So if we want to focus specifically on one country, we can go and start. We could start from the PVDB, and it's in English. If you happen to come from Ireland, you can use Ireland entries from PVDB, and also what was brought from the Irish government website. But for other EU countries, we did not cover yet those. We didn't cover yet the measures, because they are published mainly in national language, and the national language differs from English. Therefore, at the moment, we have this limitation. So I would say start from PVDB and stay tuned. Later on, we will also cover the rest of the countries.
Great. So my next question is more from an academic point of view. So let's say we link your data set with the actual COVID-19 cases and the deaths. would it then be possible when I do an analysis to check, okay, this specific measure was really successful, other measurements were not so successful, and to really have like a blue book or gold book in the end of what could be done in the next pandemic?
Well, that's a challenge in itself, actually. If you can repeat what you wanted to relate it to you said a number of deaths or number of infections, or
yes, any of those would be interesting to see.
Yeah, and in fact, this is a great question because it highlights what is the domain delineation of this data set. And when I say that, the number of deaths, number of infections, they could be linked to the reactions to COVID pandemics. So someone could try to make a connection between those numbers and the reactions, but that will be found. These reactions will be found mostly in the press releases. The PVDB dataset mainly focuses on medium to long-term responses, and their kind of target is not public health related, but it's rather social well-being, working and living conditions, traveling, and so on. So actually connecting the number of deaths or infections to the responses might be a little bit, it's not directly, I wouldn't link them directly because they have different purposes and different time spans. So I will highlight again that this Euro COVID-19 database or dataset primarily focuses on responses, so this medium to long-term economic and social issues. But because we cannot make a distinction between the responses and reactions when we collect the data, then we had to take both in. But for example, in the PVDB itself, we have in the PVDB we have only responses, not reactions.
Okay, and this is not
maybe if I may ask something now that you mentioned this, Eugenio, you said that the journalistic texts are also within the scope of the project. So would you be able to run such an exercise on those textual data that are more related to reactions?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, but that could be done also on the legal text from the seller, because from there we could not make a distinction either between what are the responses, what are the reactions. I mean, those are actually legal texts, and they don't even clearly delimit what is a response or reaction, because those are legal texts. So there we could. Yeah, but one would have to first make that distinction or try to make that distinction, and then connect it to some statistical numbers. And what with regards to texts from the European Commission action timeline or from the government, Irish government, I think that would be an interesting experiment to do, to actually try to see that connection.
Thank you. Great.
One last question before we close. The Commission, the new buzzword of the Commission is always data-driven policy making. Mm-hmm. So how could we use your data set to really check how good is the Commission, or how bad are certain policies?
Well, in fact, this is a wonderful question, because in fact this is what we are after. In a way, with the project goals, because we would like to. I mean, we know what are the official positions, and we know what's let's say done to ameliorate the consequences of the crisis and the responses. But we would like to see that from another point of view, from the data point of view, and mainly answer who has done what on which issues and for whom. So basically having a retrospective and data-driven perspective on that would be of tremendous value for the policymakers. So this is what Eurofound is very much interested in discovering or seeing, or how this looks like. But also we're interested in seeing whether EU and the member states are aligned in terms of topics that they address at different times, or like topics they address over time, and see maybe EU is heading with some topics and member states follow, or maybe some member states are heading and the rest are following, or even member states between themselves, like how is there any peer learning? Can we, let's say, see evidence for peer learning, right? Some member state is a leader and then other countries follow those practices or addressing those issues. So we would like to uncover it or try to discover it from the data, and then seeing such statistics could or such relations could definitely be of value for the policymakers. But as I said, these first two questions are more, let's say, research oriented, and policymakers are very practical and very ground and down to the earth. So they wanted to know who, what, for whom, how much, where the money come from, when is it due, and where does it apply. So very, let's say, grounded perspective. So that's why we also included this question into project goal.
Great, thank you. So to wrap it up and to close it, I would just like to mention we have this year four webinars, and just by looking at the previous ones, we had Natura 2000 from the European Environmental Agency, we had datasets from the European Central Bank, where I see a lot of links to your dataset. Next week we have one webinar from DG Just from the European Commission, where I think are also a lot of links to your dataset. So just of those 3 other datasets, I already see lots of potential questions and potential apps. And it's also great that everything is available on GitHub, so everyone can just get what they need from you. And just to mention, we have over 16,000 datasets from the EU institutions. So there are even more potential datasets to combine it with. And in total on Data Europa, we have over 1 million datasets. So really the questions and potentials are endless, and I think we only touched very little of it, and I think the creativity of the teams is always 100 times bigger than ours. So we are very, very interested to see what you come up with, and please submit your proposal by end of next week. We'll be very happy to have you in the competition. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.